Competitive by Schlock.
We are rolling for Critical Schlock tonight. What is up, everybody? I'm Darby Ellis Lewis Wilson. This is Chris Anonymous, and we are talking about two very popular movies. Well, maybe one popular movie, Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to do a comparison between the original 2000s Dungeons and Dragons and the new pretty hot Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves. What's up, Chris? How'd you like it? Did you decide to start being a role-playing person?
I don't know if I decided to start being a role-playing person, but I thoroughly enjoyed the new movie, and there were parts of the old movie that I enjoyed. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, so as I said, the original one came out in 2000. This one came out just right now, the year of our Lord 2023. Did you know that there are actually two other movies in between? A lot of people only remember the 2000s sort of infamous flop, but it had
were
two
these like direct to DVD or made for TV sequels? Or
yes.
Okay.
One was in 2005 called Wrath of the Dragon God. And the next was in 2012 called Book of Vile Darkness. And from what I've heard, the story gets better in each one. However, the special effects just go down and down and down.
They go down from what they were in the first one?
Yeah. I've seen some previews, some trailers of them, and they look like they're literally just standing in front of a green screen, like they're not even on any sort of location.
So the other thing we should mention is the original cartoon, which I thoroughly enjoyed back in the 80s.
You've seen it? I've never really seen it.
I've seen most of it. I've seen a lot of episodes. It's very, Saturday morning cartoony, but I enjoyed it. Did you ever see? Didn't they do like a movie in the 80s with Tom Hanks?
Mm-hmm. Mazes and Monsters, where you.
I've never seen that. How is that? Is that very Dungeons and Dragons-y?
I started watching it once, and honestly, I thought it was really boring, so I kind of quit paying attention. I really need to go back and check it out because it is kind of a big milestone in Dungeons and Dragons history, because it kind of perpetuated the idea that the game it's like satanic, and it makes people go crazy and they'll like kill themselves if their player dies in the game. And it perpetuated all that real crazy stuff.
Just like Jumanji did.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can't tell, right, by the threads, by what I'm saying, I am very into Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop role-playing games. I'm not super into Wizards of the Coast, who currently owns Dungeons and Dragons. They've done a lot of things to piss off people like me over the past few years. But Dungeons and Dragons, it's kind of like the Xerox of tabletop role-playing games, or the Kleenex, right? It's just kind of a catch-all term that if you tell someone like, oh, I play Dungeon Crawl Classics or something, people go, oh, what's that? But if you say I play D&D, they know exactly what you're talking about, that you're, probably in some sort of cult and live in a basement somewhere. So
preferably your mother's basement.
It's got to be your mother's basement. Father's basement is totally out. So the 2000 version, there's some very interesting budgeting things that I'd like to get into, maybe a little bit later. But to get this out of the way, it costs about $45 million to make, and it only made about $34 million back at the box office. So didn't even make its budget back. Not a good sign. Currently, the new one, Honor Among Thieves, still out in theaters, still making money. It costs about 150 million to make. It didn't break 40 million in its opening weekend, so that it was considered kind of a flop in that regard. But since with its international release, it is at 157 million. So it is taking up. It's made its budget back, and now it needs to like start making that profit if they want a future. So anyway, stick around. We are going to talk about the good, the bad, and the schlock for each of these movies. But first, Chris, tell me what you got going on.
Well, you know,
with the web of schlock.
With the web of schlock. One of the things that I liked about the new movie was just the humor in it. It's a very funny movie, but not so much that it became parody. At least to me, it felt like an appropriate level for like an action fantasy comedy. Mm-hmm. And I was looking at the writers and directors, and John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein. Mm-hmm. And some people might recognize John Francis Daley from Freaks and Geeks, the old TV show, where he actually played D&D.
Yeah, he's the main geek, I believe.
He is, yes. You know, and they went on to write and direct Vacation, the National Lampoon's reboot, and they did Game Night. Have you seen Game Night?
Yep. Yeah,
I think that
was a good movie.
Yeah, it's a fun movie. They also wrote one of the new Spider-Mans. Mm-hmm. So I mean, you like Homecoming, and and Horrible Bosses, and you're like, okay, I can see that style of humor in there. Yeah. So that's just kind of fun, where you see like, okay, I can see their take on it. The original, the one in 2000.
If I can toss in real quick.
Yeah.
So weeks before the new movie came out, there was a big controversy about something that they had said, I think in a Variety article, saying that they love emasculating their leading men, and that set the internet ablaze in some ways. And I'd like to clarify on there, because I generally am of the mindset that most leading men in movies today are made like to be imbecilic and just kind of dolts. That is not actually what they were talking about. They meant it more in a storytelling device of trying to not make the Mary Sue problem, right? Like giving them actual obstacles that they have to overcome, where they're not just like He-Man right out the gate. So,
you mean like making them human?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
where we all learn and grow and change.
So I just wanted to toss that out there in case there are like some D&D people watching. I know I'm in the news, man. I'm in the know.
So again, so many great actors in both films. That's one of the things that they have. But if you're into movies and you're listening to us, you know who these actors are. You can find out about them. There's nothing that's really like juicy or schlocky to take away. But the character of Xylus in the first Dungeons and Dragons, I believe he was the thief who owned the dragon crystal thing that they had to go through the maze.
Yeah, he's in the Thieves Guild, head of the Thieves Guild.
Guild. Richard O'Brien. That is some schlock royalty right there.
Yes. An immediately recognizable face for sure.
Yeah. He wrote the screenplay and the original songs for a schlocky little movie called Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Man, we brought that movie up a lot.
We have. So I mean, if it's ever on Tubi, we'll probably end up reviewing it.
Yeah, we better.
But you know, he's had a really interesting career where he pops up, but he's a very iconic and just a kind of that Doug Jones kind of vibe. But once you see him, you know he's there, and it's just always fun to see where he pops up. And he milked that role, and I thoroughly enjoyed him in it. And then the other person I want to bring up is the director of the first one, Courtney Solomon. And I think you have some things to talk about there. So let me just mention, he's still producing movies. Like he's still doing his thing. Directing wise, he didn't do a lot. This was his first one. And I believe he did An American Haunting, which I remember seeing, but I don't remember it very well. But I I want to say it was kind of an interesting take on a haunting movie,
Yeah.
but I
It was
can't.
all right.
Yeah.
There have been too many haunting movies to come out for me
Yeah,
to
like
remember which
Connecticut,
one it is.
America, New
Yeah.
Hampshire, Seattle, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah.
A Wyoming haunting.
Right.
That's
Oh,
next.
man. That's
We're doing
next. So, yeah, it's just interesting to see that, you know, just because you have a movie that doesn't do well or that is some like and some just utterly hate, divisive, you know, he's still doing his thing and producing movies, and it's just kind of interesting to see. But I think he has like a really interesting story about Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. So when you start to watch the original movie, there's so much around it of people not liking it and how bad it is and why it's bad. Honestly, it's not as bad as I remember. In fact, when I rewatched it this time, I was like, oh, I feel like I've completely misremembered this movie and I've made something worse in my head than what is actually there. But when you go to watch it again, it's good to know kind of this background and what was going on behind the scenes. And essentially, this was a passion project for Courtney Solomon. I can't remember how old he was when he started it, but he was very young. He was
19.
19, yeah. And so he was an avid D&D player. I believe he was like in the movie biz prior to this, and he saw that the rights were available to create a movie with it. And so he worked with the original D&D company, TSR, and tried to make a movie with it. And this is like a decade-long process. He started in 1990, and it seems like with TSR, they were really concerned about getting the representation of the game right. And so like they were kind of hard to work with. But he did manage to get a lot of people interested, very big people interested in it. I think Francis Ford Coppola was slated to direct it at some point in time, James Cameron. There were just a lot of big names attached to it, and it was going to be like $100 million movie. And this Courtney Solomon, he was going around raising money for it. At some point in time, it was like the highest funded independent film ever to be created or something. But what happened was Dungeons and Dragons got sold from TSR to Wizards of the Coast, WotC, as I'll call them. And I think that they kind of wanted to actively tank the movie because they didn't want to, I think, take on the risk of such a huge investment. And so the budget really got shifted around. So it went from a $100 million movie down to like a $3.5 million movie. And it was going to be a made for TV deal. And then he was able to raise like 30 million to 45 million for it and bump the budget back up to there. So, and another thing the WotC made them do was you can't use the script that you have to use the script that you originally made all of these deals with. And so we kind of know about this in writing scripts, that you have what we call a shit draft, a first draft, a vomit draft, where you just get everything down on paper and all the dialogue. It's very on the nose. And I think that really comes across in this movie. I think that might be part of some of the problems, is that they were going to film it with a $100 million budget. It gets more than cut in half. And they're using essentially like a first draft of the script. So for comparison, the new movie, again, $150 million. Lord of the Rings, that came out a year later, was just under 100 million. Star Wars came out prior to that. It was I think over 100 million. So had they got their original budget, some things may have been very, very different. So I don't know. I think that's something good to keep in mind when going into this movie, to know that this guy, he just pushed and pushed and pushed for 10 years to get this movie made. and now everyone hates it. So
Yeah, I mean, just because you get something made, that's really noble and cool, but it doesn't mean the final product is amazing. But it's a crazy. But I'd like to hear your good and bad.
yeah, so I like this movie. I think it's good. For me, rewatching it, like I said, it was a totally different experience going back into it. And for me, it sort of did the Batman and Robin thing where it circled around to being like so bad it's good. Like I just could not help but laugh at some of the ridiculous things going on in it. But yeah, let me get into this good here. The practical effects, while the movie is very derided for its CGI, there are a lot of great practical effects in it.
There are.
I was very impressed with. They had I think they were like orcs. I don't know, some sort of green creatures that they had roaming around. Looked very good. The skeleton that he goes to get the scepter from, and he's like talking to it. I thought that looked great. That looked amazing. What else? Oh, the sand trap.
That was really cool.
And it repeats again in the new movie. So it was a cool throwback to see.
So I don't know budget wise if it's more expensive, less expensive, a wash, and they just chose to do a lot of computer animation because that was kind of really popular at the time. But I wish that they would have done the dragons and everything practical effects.
Well, they just needed to pare it down, So again, you're working with maybe like a first draft of something where you're thinking sky's the limit. We're going to have this huge dragon battle at the end, but you only get $30 million to do it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the dragon stuff looked like an old like Myst or something on a PC back in 2000, right?
Well, and if you think of it like previously in the previous years, what just came out? Star Wars Phantom Menace, The Matrix, right? Very heavy with CGI effects. And so I'm sure they were thinking like, we're in this new world of CGI. We can do it. We can make it look cool. But also, if you look at like what else was around fantasy wise, like not Star Wars space fantasy, but high fantasy. The only thing that really comes to mind is like Dragonheart, Hercules, the Legendary Adventures or Journeys.
Yeah, I mean, this is pre-Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and we forget like how much Lord of the Rings changed the game. And we've talked in other videos when we looked at Bad Taste, how much special effects experience Peter Jackson took into Lord of the Rings. Whereas Courtney Solomon, he was just going to be the producer. He didn't want to direct at all. He just wanted to get this movie made. And then he gets thrown into the director's chair and he's supposed to like coordinate all of this stuff where he probably really didn't know what he was doing at the time. So yeah, the CGI really kind of fell flat, but when they get into the practical effects, I think they really hit it. And they also did a very smart thing with locations. So they saved a lot of money by going and filming in Prague. One of the biggest locations in there is the Sedlec ossuary. So a place where they have like all these bones decorated everywhere. And then they're able to just find some ruins and things like that, just to get more value out of their tiny budget. And I thought that was a great idea. And again, the locations look good. I think there's like a tractor in one of the shots. But other than that, you can't go wrong with a location like that. I mean,
I thought tractors existed in that world, but I guess maybe not.
It's high fantasy, man. It's a gnomish tractor. It runs on steam.
Right.
So another thing that I thought was good, and this is maybe like intentions rather than end product, but they really tried to take a different approach to this fantasy movie than previous fantasy movies. Like, so I think of like what's it called? The Death Stalker series, like where they're just like these terrible, low budget, hokey sword and sorcery movies. What they were looking at is they were looking at adventure movies. So they were looking at Indiana Jones. And I think that really comes across in the Thieves Guild maze. That felt very Indiana Jones to me. That was
one of the funnest sequences in the movie for sure.
Yeah. It also reminded me of Space Hunter. They have like that same sort of sequence in it. But they were also wanting, again, nothing like this had really come out prior. And they were wanting, Courtney Solomon was wanting it to be the fantasy Star Wars. So that's why instead of it being an ensemble movie, which would be more true to the game, where it's like 4 players all acting as one, they have like kind of the chosen one in it, like the main character, Ridley, I think. And that's because it's the Luke Skywalker model. And so he was hoping to be able to do a trilogy with these characters. And so they were looking at different resources, at different influences than what you think they would have been looking at. I get the sense when they're doing the, I don't even know what to call it. I call it the Senate, when the Empress is talking in front of like the Council of Mages. It looks very Phantom Menace to me, and CGI.
That's my worst part of the movie. I hated that in Phantom Menace, and I hated that in this movie. I hate galactic. Like maybe someone somewhere can make fantasy and galactic politics interesting, but just having someone betray a Senate council, I'm like, oh, okay, you just watched Phantom Menace and you took the worst part of Phantom Menace and you put it into your movie.
Well, tell me this: the Empress, does she not look like? Is it also the Empress in Neverending Story? Right, her head.
Yeah, it's Thora Birch. Was she in Neverending Story? She was the little kid in Hocus Pocus, and then she was in American Beauty. And do you ever see Ghost World?
No, I never saw that.
But yeah, let me look. I think you might be right.
They do have big names in this. Marlon Wayans was hot at the time. Jeremy Irons. They have Tom Baker in there. They have the 4th Doctor Who in there. Something in for the nerds. Like they did have a good cast, essentially.
Right.
So I've kind of, we've already touched on the bad a lot. The CGI, the kind of the lack of an ensemble, which is very important for a Dungeons and Dragons movie, which gets rectified in the latest. The acting, there are definitely some, while they have great actors, they definitely have some problems with the acting. Like Jeremy Irons does some really weird stuff where he like, I can't remember what he's saying, but he makes like weird noises. He's like, yes.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, is that a script problem? And he didn't know how to act it out. Like the script said he hisses maniacally or something. And he's like,
yeah. And I'm sure they didn't have a lot of time to build their characters and to find nuances. And like, also, I think he's been on record saying he did it for the money. So how are you into it? Like, you know what? This is a supervillain and a fantasy. I'm hissing. It was not Thora Birch in the Neverending Story. It was Tammy Stronach. I'm sure I'm butchering your last name, but credit where credit's due. Well,
and we also have another problem. A big problem is the lipstick. Damador,
who I think he played. That's a reoccurring character in the other.
He's in the next one.
Okay,
he's in Wrath of the Dragon God apparently. But they put this black or purple lipstick on him and
blue. Black,
blue
changes.
And like women have this problem with lipstick. Have you ever noticed some women, they'll put on lipstick and they really like duck lip out? He's doing the same thing, man, through the whole movie. He is just smacking lips, just. And I'm like, stop it with the lips. I can't watch you and take you seriously in any way. So, but I mean, a lot of the stuff we have to remember it was also made for kids. I think like in the sort of 10 to 12 age range,
Right.
because they're trying to get that market. So that's why like some things are like very hammy, over the top. People are mugging a lot for the camera. We got Marlon Wayans doing his best Ruby Rod impression. There's just a lot of attempted like childish humor in it, which didn't turn out
quadrant, right? You're
Yeah.
trying to hit all the demographics. Yep.
And my last bad thing for it is that they do a lot of tell, don't show, where they're saying like, oh, I had this vision of a dragon, or we got sucked into the map and got put on this quest. And I'm like, that all would have been great to see. And I'm pretty sure that you could like cheaply film a ghost talking to you and giving you a mission. But I guess that they did film that stuff, and there are maybe like longer versions out there, or they're deleted scenes on the DVD. But man, they really sort of screwed themselves not putting that stuff in, because that's such a writing sin, such a TV sin to tell and don't show. But that's all I have for good and bad.
All right. Yeah.
Let's move into the modern age.
Okay. All right. The Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves, or as you like to call it, Dungeons and Dragons hat.
I'm hoping that'll catch on.
Yeah.
Who doesn't like hats?
Right. A D&D hat. So good, man. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I thought it was funny. I thought it was fun. I thought there was great fantasy. I thought there was fun adventure. I liked all the characters. They all had something. There didn't feel like there was any character that was just a throwaway. They all had something that they were working on or working toward or doing, or it felt like they had lives that were lived in outside of the story we're watching. The special effects were good. I don't really have any specific goods. It's just, I thought it was all good. I thought it was a really fun movie. The cast is great. The acting is good. Chris Pine is just super watchable. I really liked his character.
Yeah, he was really funny.
I liked all the creatures. It didn't feel too much. Like some fantasy after Lord of the Rings had that thing where they just keep hitting you over the head with a new subculture and a new creature and a new group of people and a new this, and it overwhelmed you. And Lord of the Rings did a good job of like just giving you the right amount where it doesn't feel like, oh, it's just elves or it's just orcs. Like it feels like it's this huge world, but it also doesn't hit you over the head with like 1,000 creatures that you just, it just hints at them in here. You see this and you see that.
They had quite a bit of creatures in this.
They did, but it didn't feel too much. It didn't feel like they were parading them in front of you. It just felt like you caught a glimpse of them as you were going by.
Yeah. Yep. That's very
true.
true.
So I want a lot of creatures. I just don't want you to parade them in front of me like I'm at a zoo. I just want them to be existing in the world.
See, we spent all this money to create this. Look at it.
Right. And it didn't feel like they did that here. And it felt like, again, a non-player, it felt like they paid some homage to D&D specific things, like when they have the treasure chest that was actually a creature that tried to eat them. And that feels like, So what's it called?
A mimic.
Okay.
They mimic objects.
All right. Yeah. And so, you find those in a lot of video games, a lot of role-playing video games, which I'm sure they got their inspiration at least somewhat from D&D. So I'll move into the bad, because right now I'm just gushing about it. The bad, there's only one dragon, and if you're going to do one dragon like we were talking about, you do a chubby dragon, because he was adorable.
You make it memorable. That's a little plushie. That's I want a stuffed animal.
Yeah. Well, so my birthday's coming up in a couple months.
You want a fat dragon?
I want a fat dragon. Daddy wants a fat dragon. So my one main bad is that it felt derivative. It felt like I'd seen it all before, and they pulled it off perfectly, but it didn't feel like it brought me anything new. It just felt like a a generic story told really well. And I don't mean it generic in a really derogatory way. I just mean we knew what we were getting. We were getting sword and sorcery. We were getting kind of fun, offbeat humor. It was an adventure as a group of people. The climax felt very Avengers-y.
The Skybeam.
Yeah, and just how they all grouped together and each one had to use their own skill set to work together to defeat the single bad guy.
Right.
And then, the camera spinning around to show what each one's doing. And I can't think of a better way to do that. I mean, you have to have them all participate and you have to show it. But right. it felt a little Avengers-y. And, some of go ahead.
The main bad guy, the main bad girl, the Red Wizard, I felt like it built way up to that, like that was going to be the big climax, but that actually didn't feel like the climax to me. That was resolved very quickly. Like, oh, we just have to get everybody out of the stadium and then fight her, and then that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a little bit of a letdown. Overall, I liked the ending. So that was the problem. There were other times that it felt like Lord of the Rings, and there were other times that it felt like Guardians of the Galaxy, and great things to emulate. And again, the problem with talking about this movie is that a lot of those things were inspired by D&D, the game, whether they know it or not, right?
Right. But then a lot of the writers for those things were inspired by the game.
Right. So is it derivative of these works, or is it taking back the crown that these movies established? But then you have something like Lord of the Rings, which those novels clearly would have been an inspiration to the creators of D&D. So it's this cyclical, snake eating itself sort of thing. Yeah. So that's my big complaint, and I don't really think it's a huge complaint, because I don't think you have to reinvent the wheel every time. I think you can just tell a popular, good popcorn story, and if you pull it off, you pull it off. So yeah. So then the other two minor bads, one dragon. It's called Dungeons and Dragons, and then here's one that plural. But this one I'm going to toss off to you because I can't answer it. I felt like I didn't know how much it paid service to the game. It's a really fun fantasy adventure, right? And to someone who doesn't play and is not super versed in that world, I thoroughly loved it. But I don't know if it hit all the buttons for, you can't please all the hardcore fans. I get that. But you can pay homage in a certain way. And so did they? Is that a bad or is that a good?
Yeah, well, that sounds like Schlock.
Let's go into
the Schlock section.
Yeah.
All right. So it did pay homage to the game, but it paid homage to the Wizards of the Coast version of the game. So that lore that you get, Mordenkainen's Lock, Neverwinter, the Forgotten Realms, the Sword Coast, they name drop all of this stuff. And that was very cool. That is WotC's Dungeons and Dragons. That is the world that they built. The different human races all just being like one homogenous group. Like that is very Wizards of the Coast, as opposed to like Lord of the Rings or House of Dragon, where like different ethnicities of people, right, would signify different regions of where they're from. This is humans were just like created of all different shades all at once. And everybody mates with everybody. Barbarians mate with gnomes. Aarakocras they can mate with any, like everyone's just doing it in D&D apparently in the WotC version. So it did create that world really well. Like if you pick up a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons book and thumb through it and look at the artwork in it, this movie looks like that artwork, or that artwork looks like this movie. But you are right. you're not going to please everybody because everybody plays a different game of Dungeons and Dragons. Like some people love to play in the Forgotten Realms and on the Sword Coast and this pre-made world that Wizards of the Coast have created. But then people like me, we like to create our own worlds, right? And we like to fashion our own storylines or adventures or whatever. So you have like so many different types of fans and people who are interested in the hobby for different reasons. And absolutely, you're not going to please all of them. But I think that they did a good job of making a movie based on their version of the game, if that makes any sense.
Which is what they would do. Why would they make it based on the old version if they don't?
Yeah, why not? I know I would have liked to see it be a little more meta, maybe in like a ending scene or something where it shows people playing. But you know what? They don't have to do that. That's something that I know a lot of fans wanted. I would have liked to have seen it, but it's fine. The hardest thing to compare to with the game is the combat. And this is a real problem in role-playing games in general. Fast action combat. These games, like at their core, are essentially turn-based, right? Like time works really weird. Like an entire round of everybody going one after another like takes place in the same like 6 or 10 second period, but like they go successively, and the more powers and upgrades and stuff they get, the longer it takes, and it goes really slow. You don't have these cinematic combats where people are running and jumping over each other and shooting this and then they stab this guy and then they dodge that. And you can, but you really have to go away from actual Dungeons and Dragons. And that's why a lot of people are getting interested in the OSR, the old school Renaissance or old school revival, where they're using like older versions of the game or clones of older versions of the games, where there's like sort of less rules, characters are a little more less badass, and things just click along a lot quicker. So you can try and emulate that fast-paced action a little bit more. But that is a problem that plagues players every day.
So something I thought was interesting, and this is kind of schlocky, kind of not. So D&D, like Lord of the Rings or any high fantasy, they create huge, vast worlds that you could tell myriad stories in, thousands upon thousands of stories, right? And it's interesting that the two D&D movies are about honor among thieves. They're about a group of people who come together who are thieves who have to steal something or stop someone bad from doing something. But it's thieves who have to go on an adventure quest to steal and or retrieve things. Right. And part of that's baked into the adventure movie plot. Well,
it's all from The Hobbit.
Correct. Yep. But it's just interesting that like you had 23 years and maybe you saw that there were great things in this original D&D and you're like, okay, I can tell this story, but I can tell it in the right way, the way it should have been done, the way that they probably wanted it to be done, but fate dealt them a bad hand. But it's just interesting to think like you could have told any story, like why thieves stealing stuff and then redeeming them. It's just interesting that like when you can tell any story from
why is it not a party of clerics?
Seriously, like I'm sure that's not as fun as thieves. Like thieves are inherently cinematic because they're rogues and they are slightly anti-hero and they have cool skill sets, and like I get it, but it's just interesting that when you have that vast of a world that you choose to do pretty much the same story beats, the same skeleton of a movie.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because so originally they were called thieves. The class of character that you could play was called a thief, but then when the Satanic Panic happened and parents were worried that D&D was teaching their kids bad things, they changed thief to rogue. And so the thieves, right, they represent like all of all of the characters, right? They're all thieves, even though we have a sorcerer, we have a druid, we have a barbarian, and we also have a bard, maybe. Chris Pine's character, he sings and he makes plans, but he doesn't ever actually like do any of the bard stuff from the game, which is really interesting because it's kind of like, what is he? Is he a fighter that sings? But me personally, I think bards are stupid anyway. So that was totally fine. He's just a fighter that sings. I like that.
Singing fighter. Yeah, I liked his lute playing, especially when they had projected him and then he like basically starts skipping.
Oh man, that was so funny.
Yeah.
But again, speaking of songs, I gotta throw out a bad real quick.
Yeah.
They advertise this whole movie with A Whole Lot of Love from Led Zeppelin.
Right.
Never hear A Whole Lot of Love. I feel like that's a cardinal sin. If you're gonna hype a movie up with a song, you got to get that song in the movie.
I think they do that a lot anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's probably, getting people pumped for the show. It's probably a lot cheaper to get the rights to just put the song in a trailer than your movie. And
right. But Led Zeppelin, man, that's a big grab.
Yeah.
Or it used to be anyway.
Right.
I really got to throw this out here. What was it called? The staff, the hither thither.
Yes. Hither thither. Upper and succotash.
So I think one of the truest things to the game that this movie had is what I call shenanigans. So they go to the bridge. The bridge is like this very complex puzzle. And then one of the characters like immediately messes it all up. That is so true to the game. The dungeon master, he'll like set up this elaborate maze or trap or scenario or whatever for the characters to go through. And then they'll just plow right through and use something like a magical staff that they found earlier that the DM maybe gave to them for that specific situation to just bypass everything. And this movie did that very, very well. It showed one of the key components of playing role-playing games, which is shenanigans.
Nice. Okay. That's cool. Because I just thought it was a funny bit, but it's cool that there's like some history and weight to it for someone who thoroughly plays the game and enjoys it. That's cool.
Well, and you're trying to do funny bits, the whole time that you're playing. I know that there are some people that play very seriously and they're like, they can't break character and whatnot. But part of the fun is sort of being in this imaginary world and sort of tinkering with it, finding the cracks in it, like sort of trying to break it a little bit. At least me and my players, anyway, we're always messing with each other. So
you brought up the hither thither staff. It's interesting because it wasn't called that in the original Dungeons and Dragons, but it was there
in the
2000 Dungeons and Dragons in the first movie, because that's how the female wizard and the two thieves escape from Blue Lips.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So lot of callbacks. I think it's really cool that they look back at some of the source material. They didn't credit the original creators of D&D, which kind of sucks, but it does look like they looked back to see sort of where it came from. Mm-hmm. So
well, and I think
cool.
Both movies are coming from the same source material, so of course you're gonna find more similarities than you would not. But it's just interesting how similar so many of the beats are.
Right.
So, so my final take on this, and then I'll let you have the final word, and then we can talk about what we're doing next week. My final take is I didn't hate the 2001. It's really bad, but there's a lot of really cool things in it, and some of the special effects, that was a product of its time. Like, that it's just like watching a movie from the 80s, you have to, or 70s or 50s or whenever, you have to judge it by the special effects that they were available at the time and that they could afford. Right. I think that the new movie is just top notch, a lot of fun. And I think it's the version that the people who made the original wish they could have made. And I'm glad that the world finally got to see a fun movie set in this really, really influential touchstone world. Because besides Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, I mean, I think for fantasy, this is definitely one of the touchstones in the modern pop culture.
For sure. My final take is I like both movies. I think the new one is obviously a better movie. I really hope that they don't get scared off by the low opening weekend numbers and that they continue to make another one, because I really think that they can build a series here. And I think that they should embrace the old one and bring it in to the canon in some way and do double releases and tie them together in some way. Just to keep them humble, you know what I mean? So anyway, we are running out of time. I'm clicking the outro music right now. Our lovely assistant Megan is gone tonight, so we miss you and we wish we could have pictures and all that stuff. But we'll be back.
What are we doing next week?
Next week we are doing Super Mario Brothers. We're doing the same kind of deal that we did this week. We're going to look at the original one and we're going to look at the new ones blowing up in theaters right now.
Guys.
So also, if you want to see us do the other D&D movies, let us know in the comments. Tell us, and we'll do it. Because, man, I could talk D&D all day. Also, if you're on Instagram, check me out at TipsyCrits. That's TIPSYCRITS. There's my plug. All right. I'm Gaudios Lewis Wilson. This is Who Am I? Yeah, we've been compelled by Schlock.
Wait, no.